What up, everybody? It's Chris Roscoe, and today we're going to go into a deep dive of the 4 different kinds of rejection, abandonment, social issues that might cause you to have a hard time holding boundaries. So the first one is rejection. This one is fairly simple to understand, that you think that if you hold a boundary, if you stand up for yourself, if you do anything like that, that people are going to reject you. Now, a lot of times this comes to a much deeper fear where if people reject you, then essentially you're going to be left alone forever to fend on yourself, and essentially your life is going to turn to shit. So if rejection is the one that you're afraid of, then you really need to have a plan for what happens if people reject you. Because the thing you have to understand about this, if you hold your boundaries, if you tell the truth, if you stand up for yourself, people will reject you. Not everybody, but it will happen. There will be people in your life that are attached to the version of you that doesn't have boundaries. They're literally emotionally dependent on them being able to walk all over you, and they may not even know it. So as you start to stand up for yourself, as you start to hold your boundaries, you may actually unconsciously and unknowingly trigger the emotional security and foundation of the people in your life. They may not even know this, they mean well, they may even love you, but this may be something that they don't know about. If that does start to happen, you can make a plan for that. You can acknowledge that that may happen, figure out what about that is specifically scary to you as an individual, come up with a plan for that. You can lovingly communicate whatever it is you need to communicate to them, let them know that everything's okay, that you still love them and everything's fine, but ultimately this is what you need to do in order to take care of yourself. Based on how they react to you describing what you're going through and what you need to do for yourself, that is how you can tell how far away that person needs to be from you. If they're like, oh wow, cool, thanks for telling me, I didn't know what was going on, I was getting scared, I'm happy to support you, I'm glad you're doing this, great. That is a person you can have close to you because they actually respect what you're doing and they support your growth. However, if they do have some kind of weird negative reaction and then you explain yourself and they still have a negative reaction, then that is a good sign that probably some space needs to be taken and that person needs to not necessarily be in the inner circle, at least until they figure out whatever's going on with them, because as you rise up, they're going to keep bringing negativity to you. And so you need to create space for yourself so you can heal and grow and become the version of yourself that you really want to become. So that's how to handle fear of rejection. And the next one up is abandonment. It's pretty similar, but it's distinct in some really important ways. Because when you get rejected, it's painful and it's terrible, but a lot of times you can have other people to fall back on and all that sort of stuff. However, when it comes to abandonment, usually the fear there is that you are going to be left alone by yourself forever to fend for yourself. And most of the time, people who fear abandonment don't necessarily fear that they're going to be left alone by themselves. They fear that they're going to be left alone by themselves and will be incapable of taking care of themselves. That's why abandonment can be so scary. It's not just that you're going to be alone. It's that when we're little kids, we're afraid of being alone and unable to fend for ourselves. And that's the really scary thing. What you really have to do is find the part of yourself that is afraid of abandonment, afraid of being left alone, figure out what specifically it is afraid of. Most of the time, it's going to be being alone and not being able to fend for yourself, take care of yourself, stand up for yourself, meet your basic needs and all that sort of stuff. And what you need to do is essentially start building trust with it so that it can see you as the person who will take care of it, even if everybody else leaves. And then once that happens and you genuinely feel secure in your ability to fend for yourself and take care of yourself, suddenly abandonment isn't so scary anymore, because when you're on your own, you're good, you're taken care of, and there's nothing to be afraid of. So abandonment's fairly straightforward, but the next one is conflict. And this is where it kind of opens up, because when it comes to conflict, there's a lot of different things you could be afraid of in conflict. Most of the time, people that fear conflict usually fear this ability or this tendency that they have to collapse in the face of conflict and essentially have other people walk all over them. Or maybe you're on the other side of it and you fear conflict because you might get too angry, overexert yourself, and potentially cause harm. Just like everything else, what you need to do is figure out specifically what it is about conflict that scares you as an individual and come up with a plan for it. If you're afraid that you're essentially going to collapse and let everybody else walk all over you and all that kind of stuff, then what you really need to do is figure out, why would I collapse? What is it I'm afraid that would happen if I didn't collapse? Can I come up with a plan for that can help this part of me see that there's no reason to collapse? I can take care of whatever's going to happen, allow me to stand my ground, set my boundaries, stand up for myself, and ultimately create a healthy environment for myself, and then just let other people deal with it however they need to. Now, if you're on the other side of the spectrum, which is where I've been, where you're afraid of conflict because you think you might go a little bit overboard and you might accidentally hurt somebody, then what you need to do is figure out why that's the case. For me, I had a lot of repressed anger and rage at things that happened to me as a little kid that I couldn't control. I felt a lot of pain and I was really angry about it. And that pain made me want to lash out at the world around me. So what I had to do was talk to that part of myself, help it calm down, help it see that everything's okay, that it's safe, and that there's no real reason to be angry anymore. Get that anger out so it can leave my body, ultimately allowing me to calm down and deal with conflict in a way where I don't have to get overly aggressive. So for you, you're gonna have to figure out what it is specifically you're afraid of happening and why you're afraid that that might happen. Because if you are afraid of it, that means that there's probably a part of you that will do that. So you need to figure out why that is, address it on a fundamental level, and then that part of you can calm down and you won't have to fear going overboard anymore. All right, so the last one is abuse. And this one is a little bit tricky because if you grew up in an environment where standing up for yourself or having needs or desires or boundaries or really anything like that could potentially get you verbally or even physically abused, this one's a little bit trickier because that's really scary to deal with, and you may still have gotten yourself into environments where that may still be the case. If that is the case, what I would recommend doing is getting out of that environment as fast as you possibly can so that you can create the space around you needed to heal from whatever it is you're dealing with. However, for everybody else, like me, where you would still fear conflict or some kind of abuse, because that did happen to me as a little kid as well, and what I had to do was realize that I'm actually not in that environment anymore, and anybody around me where if they were to get abusive when I stated a boundary, it's just simply not anybody I need to be around. And I'm an adult now, because the thing is, when you're scared of this as a little kid, you're afraid of it in an environment where you have absolutely no control. You're the kid, your parents are the parents, brothers and sisters, or whoever else. You don't really get much of a say because you're a little kid. You're not in control of your reality yet. You don't have a say in how things go. And if you do speak up, you might get abused. And so what you need to do is understand that you're not a little kid anymore. You can actually exercise a lot more control over your reality and your experience and your environment. Step into that, but also come up with a plan for what happens if somebody does get abusive. Sometimes you may need to have these boundary conversations over the phone so that the other person can't blow up in your face. Sometimes you may need to fucking move. You may need to do whatever you need to do to get away from the abusive situation or the potential of an abusive situation. There are some real steps you need to take, and we can go much deeper on that in another video later. But the main thing that you need to know about being afraid of abuse is either there is a real life fear that you need to get away from in some way, or it's an imagined fear based on your past where you can talk to that part of yourself, let it know that it's safe, let it know that you're gonna take care of it, and there's no reason to be afraid anymore. All right, so these are the 4 main psychological influences that may cause you to not want to hold your boundaries, stand up for yourself, or anything like that. Hopefully you've been able to see yourself in some of these. Hopefully you've been able to get some awareness and see a potential way out of this. If you have any deeper questions about this, let me know. I'd be happy to go into that. But either way, I love you. I'll see you next time. I'm Chris Roscoe.